What is up guys, Staxo here. Welcome back to part 2 of my initial thoughts on the preseason Keystones. So let's get right into it. First off, we have the Sorcery Tree. I'm going to go ahead and group Aery and Arcane Comet together here because they pretty much serve the same function. They're both poke Keystones. Aery does less damage but is guaranteed, while Arcane Comet does more but has a chance to miss. Now they both add a decent amount of damage in lane, but as far as damage Keystone goes, there are way better options out there. Now for Phase Rush. Good lord, what did Riot do to you? Maybe I got too used to how good Storm Raiders was, but Phase Rush just feels really lackluster. It starts off at 15% bonus move speed and scales up to 40% at level 18. Now if you've forgotten, Storm Raiders gave 40% move speed from level 1. Now in order to proc Phase Rush, you need to hit the enemy with 3 hits, which is really easy to do as Talon. The upside is this makes it much easier to proc on tanks, because it is now reliant on the number of times you hit the enemy, rather than the damage that you deal. Against tanks, it eventually hit a point where you just couldn't do 30% damage in one combo. Early game, however, the bonus move speed is just so bad. It starts to get better during the mid to late game, but as Talon, you really want as much power in your early game as much as possible in order to snowball. Now having that is a pretty big weakness. They also nerfed the cooldown from 10 seconds to 15 seconds. Double nerfing something is never a good sign. It's not completely awful though, in the end it's still Storm Raiders, although much weaker. But let's be honest, the nerf was needed. Storm Raiders was just way too good back in Season 7. I can still see Phase Rush being used in matchups with a lot of slows, like against Nasus. In fact, it's not that Phase Rush is too weak that makes it not as good, it's the fact that another Keystone is just much stronger. Moving right along, we've got our final 3 Keystones. These 3 were the ones I was really looking forward to trying out when they first came out. So let's go ahead and start with Dark Harvest. If I were to describe Dark Harvest on Talon, I would say that it's a gimmicky snowball Keystone. It's fun to use, but I personally wouldn't take this in a serious game. It doesn't have too much laning presence. The only time you're able to proc it in lane will be when a cannon minion dies and you go in within the next 20 seconds. You can, however, do some crazy tactics where you proc it twice if you time it with both cannon minion deaths. The huge downside for this Keystone is that it's pretty hard to roam with Dark Harvest. Before you collect 150 stacks, you can only hold a Dark Harvest proc for 20 seconds. That makes the timing between you collecting the soul and roaming with it extremely tight. It also takes forever to reach the 150 stacks. I played a full-on Fiesta where there were a ton of kills, and it still took around 20 minutes to get 150 stacks. That means you're pretty much playing with no Keystone for a majority of the time that Talon's the strongest. From what I recall, Dark Harvest only had a few hundred total damage dealt, because it would always run out before I fought during my roams. However, once you get those 150 stacks, this Keystone does a lot of damage. If you're able to reset it multiple times during a team fight, it does the most damage out of all the Keystones. It synergizes really well with Duskblade and makes your auto attacks hit like a truck. It's also infinitely scaling, which sort of offsets Talon's trash late game, but I don't think it's really worth giving up most of your early game in order for this. The best part of this Keystone is that you can pretend you're pre-reworked Talon and just go in with a one-hit auto build with your ult. Predator is a surprising Keystone for me. At first, a long cooldown compared to the other Keystones and the utter lack of lane presence turned me off this Keystone, but once I gave it a try, it quickly became my favorite. Now, favorite doesn't necessarily mean the best, however. It's my favorite because of the fact that I have the most fun playing with Predator than any other Keystone. With Predator, after a 3-second channel, you gain 45% bonus move speed, or 15 seconds, and your next attack or spell will deal bonus damage. The bonus damage is pretty decent, but the extra movement speed is extremely nice. It's pretty much a ghost. can pretty much make it to any fight on the map within a few seconds. If you take Predator, taking Ingenious Hunter in your secondary is mandatory. Predator is considered an active item, and Ingenious Hunter lowers its cooldown by 40% and max stack. This puts Predator on a 60 to 70 second cooldown rather than 120-ish. The cooldown starts counting down as Predator is active, making the cooldown feel much shorter. It also lines up very nicely with your ultimate during the mid game when you're around 20% CDR and can be a good substitute for Yumu's if you decide to get an Edge of Night instead. I was actually surprised by how often I was able to use Predator when I first started trying it out. It was up pretty much for every single one of my roams. The only issue is that the enemy gets a marker above their head when you're near them with Predator active, sort of like Rengar ult. How big of a downside this is really depends on you. I personally don't think it's too big of a problem, but the issue is there. Predator is a great keystone if you have a roam heavy playstyle rather than a lane dominant one. So the question is the extra roaming power needed? Honestly, maybe not. If you take Predator, Ingenious Hunter needs to be taken, which means you won't be able to take Relentless Hunter. A fully stacked Relentless Hunter with Mobies will reach 512 movement speed. With Predator active, Mobies only reaches 563. Talon is already one of the best roaming champions in the game. Taking a roaming keystone might be a bit overkill. By taking Predator, you'll be giving up the laning strength of Electrocute, the snowball damage of Dark Harvest, or the mid to late game safety of Phase Rush. Perhaps this decision making is what Riot intended when they created this new system, the freedom of choosing your keystone based on enemy picks and personal playstyle. I can see Predator being useful in matchups like Gnar or Kennen, where you'll pretty much never be able to get a kill in lane, and the extra roam power of Predator could come in handy. And here we are, the last keystone. It's been a long ride. Saved the best for last. Gonna be blunt here, in my opinion, and it seems in most other Talon players' opinion, Electrocute is the best keystone for Talon at the moment. The reason Electrocute is so good right now is because it is consistently and reliably does the most damage during the laning phase, and basically throughout the whole game, for how easy and how often you can proc it. It's also by far the most boring keystone, by the way. Electrocute is just extra damage when you do your combo. It requires next to no thought or interaction. It's just there. I didn't think much of this back in Season 7 when I was using Thunderlords, because back then all the keystones were pretty boring. But now that I got a taste of the new stuff like Predator and Unsealed Spellbook, and how interactive these new keystones are, Electrocute is just hella boring. Electrocute is the only keystone besides Aery and Arcane Comet that does any reliable damage during the laning phase, which is Talon's most important stage of the game. Electrocute does more damage than Aery and Arcane Comet, although on a much longer cooldown, but honestly that doesn't really matter because Talon relies on all-ins and not small pokes. Electrocute's burst is just so consistent. I lost count of how many times during laning phase, hell even throughout the entire game, where I said if I had Electrocute, they would be dead. Electrocute also does so much damage now that if you're snowballing really hard, you have the option of going Ghostblade first over Dustblade for better roams, whereas last season I always went Dustblade first because the extra damage was needed. Now you may be wondering, what happened to the previous Thunderlords vs Storm Raiders debate? Does that still apply to Electrocute and Phase Rush? Well, in my opinion, not anymore. I feel like Riot has completely messed up the balance of Electrocute and Phase Rush. Back in Season 7, Thunderlords and Storm Raiders were in this nice area of balance where one wasn't significantly stronger than the other. Storm Raiders was slightly better because of its versatility and just overall being broken, but Thunderlords still had its strength that let it compete with Storm Raiders. Preseason completely messes this all up. Riot double nerfed Phase Rush, reducing its early movement speed as well as giving it a longer cooldown, while at the same time buffing Electrocute's damage. Electrocute does more base damage than Thunderlords and has better AD scaling. It has a longer cooldown than Thunderlords, but honestly that's not too big of a problem for Talon. Because of all this tips the scale to Electrocute's favor, meaning the extra damage Electrocute provides now outweighs the speed boost from Phase Rush. Take Electrocute if your goal is to win. Taking everything into consideration, by everything I mean laning power, flexibility, and consistency, it is overall Talon's best keystone at the moment. With all that said, here's the final tier list for the keystone. Electrocute is by far the best. It does the most damage throughout the whole game and synergizes really well with Talon's kit. Next comes Predator and Phase Rush. These two would be very good if Electrocute wasn't so strong. There might be some situations where they are better than Electrocute though, we'll have to see. Next we have Dark Harvest, Aery, Arcane Comet, and Unsealed Spellbook. Dark Harvest takes too long to scale up, while Aery and Arcane Comet is strong in lane, but it doesn't do much later on. Unsealed Spellbook is here because I see potential in it, but I haven't experimented enough to put it higher on the list. And then there's everything else. If you're still watching this, I thank you for sitting through all that. These are all my thoughts on the Keystones in relation to Talon so far. It's still pretty early into the season, so you never know if Riot is going to buff or nerf any of the Keystones. Or maybe some new tech or playstyle changes will be discovered, you never know. Everyone is still experimenting, and we'll have a better idea of the meta once the new season starts. If you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to subscribe for more content like it. As always guys, thank you a ton for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.